ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming. It's very important for us that you are here. Now we're expecting a long event. We'll have a panel now and then a concert of classical academic music, but contemporary music at 8 o'clock. So in the middle we also prepared some programs. So yeah, it's like one day cultural event, not a festival of course, but we are very grateful to several funds who supported us, because actually for 1 year we were trying to answer this question, how it happened that we as Russians now, as we are in the eyes of the whole world, and today we will try to answer this question, maybe to understand something, maybe to raise bigger questions, more questions, and to understand how to live further, basically.
Good afternoon also, and thank you. We want to thank also the funds that have supported this program. It's Nederlands Letterenfonds and W. Janssen Fonds. And the revenue of this event will go for the support of Russian-Ukrainian artists and also humanitarian help for Ukraine. Please enjoy the evening and enjoy.
And we will start this particular part with the music that is written in Gulag in 1937. It was written 24 preludes and fugues, back then by Vsevolod Zadiratsky, and Slava Poprugin, who is the professor in Den Haag Conservatory, pianist also from Russia, will perform now one of these preludes and fugues, and then the panel will start.
Good evening to you all. I think I have to put this a little bit nearer to my... First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to moderate this round table at what is, of course, a very sad occasion, the first anniversary of Russia's attack on Ukraine on 24th of February last year. My name is Gijs Kessler. I am a senior researcher at the International Institute of Social History in Amsterdam. I lived and worked in Russia for over 25 years, and last year I published a book which looks back at Russia's post-communist transformation, Rusland, land dat anders wil zijn, Russia, the country that wants to be different. For those of you who are interested, I've got some copies with me and to sell, and in the spirit of this evening, half of the price of the book will go to will be donated to Ukraine. Today's event is an initiative of the Russian-speaking community in the Netherlands, which are opposed to the war. And that's the reason that for the next 1.5 hours or so, Maria and Christina already alluded to it, we will be confronting a set of sometimes difficult questions, soul-searching questions on how we ended up here, where we are now, where we stand in this situation. What can be done under the circumstances we are in? And last but not least, the question, which is the title of today's event, who am I? Who are we? The setup of this collective investigation, if you want, you could call it like this, is the following. Saskia Tornquist, a musicologist, will kick off with a short talk on the subject of culture and complicity. And after that I will be chairing a round table with three distinguished guests from the Russian-speaking community in the Netherlands. I will introduce them to you later when we start. And at the end of the round table, there will also be plenty of time and possibility for all of you to ask questions or to contribute to the discussion. At 7 o'clock we end this part of the evening. There will be a buffet served, I understood. And at 20:15 the concert starts. So that's the first thing. I think the program ends at 10 o'clock. But now first a presentation by Saskia Tornquist. Saskia is a musicologist and a writer. She studied the reception in the Netherlands of the music by Dmitri Shostakovich. She teaches cultural history and the history of music at the Amsterdam Conservatory. Currently she's working together with historian Nikolai Epple on a book project titled The Concert of Europe, and the book deals with the role of music in the emergence of nationalism in 19th century Europe. Saskia, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Gijs. Am I clearly audible for all of you? If not, please raise your hand. Before I start my little lecture, I will start up some music, and I'm convinced most of you know the piece. We will do some deep listening. To be continued later. You listened here to the first bars of the composition, The Steppes of Central Asia, written by Alexander Borodin, late 19th century composer. He's one of the composers which I and Luc Banhuizen, who should be here, but he's unfortunately not able to come, but we address certainly Borodin in our book. Under the banner of romantic nationalism, composers from all over Europe created a stream of works which served in one way or another the nationalist agenda of their own nation or ethnic group. So was also the case in 19th century Russia, where specifically one group of nationalist composers, the so-called Mighty Five, dominated the musical landscape in the 60s and 70s of that century. Alexander Borodin was a member of this group, and you just listened to the opening of his symphonic poem in the steppes of Central Asia. This is a prominent repertoire piece, still very much loved with orchestras worldwide and played a lot on classical radio here in the Netherlands. It's beautiful music, isn't it? But what does it tell us? Well, Borodin wrote a little story, a little background story, and I'd like to read it here for you. I quote here Borodin. In the silence of the monotonous steppes of Central Asia is heard the unfamiliar sound of a peaceful Russian song. You just could hear it. From the distance we hear the approach of horses and camels and the bizarre and melancholy notes of an oriental melody. A caravan approaches, escorted by Russian soldiers, and continues safely on its way through the immense desert. It disappears slowly. The notes of the Russian and Asiatic melodies join in a common harmony which dies away as the caravan disappears in the distance. Unquote. Well, let's apply Borodin's own explanation now on the music itself. So let's go a little bit deeper into the music. I propose to listen once more to the first theme, which I call the Russian subject. And note the archaic character which refers smoothly to Russian Orthodox music. And note also the stable and self-assured rhythm. This long high note in high strings, what does it represent? The horizon of the expanding Russian Empire. Next, there appears later on in the piece a second theme, which I call the exotic object. It's played by another instrument, an English horn. The English horn is a loved instrument when it comes to Oriental melodies. It has a very sensual timbre. The melody is melancholic and mysterious. It's in minor. The rhythm is flexible. Poprugin calls this a bizarre melody. Let's listen to it. So far, so good. Later on, the first theme, the Russian subject, appears, it comes closer. Now we will hear it in the horns, and all musicians, and especially horn players, know what the horns represent. They symbolize the hunting. And later on, this melody reveals itself in full glory, and there you hear really military music. The melody pretends even to be a national anthem. It becomes louder and louder. Exotic object. We will hear the melody again, but now it sounds even more vulnerable. It is played in the lower strings, and then something very special happens to this melody. It sounds subtle, but it is very, very concrete. This minor melody transmits to a high register, and there it transforms to its major version, which represents illumination. Theme number 2, the object is now prepared to fuse with theme number 1. This is an obvious act of Russification in music. Let's listen. Transformation. The object is transformed, is prepared to merge with the first theme, the Russian subject. And you will hear them finally sounding together, and they even exchange musical material. Isn't it beautiful? But finally, only the echo of the first theme, the Russian subject, remains on the shifting horizon. The high tone with which the piece started and which symbolizes the shifting horizon of the Russian Empire, that is the very end of this piece. The Russian subject remains as an echo, and it will continue certainly its path, looking for new adventures or conquests. At home to the very end, but I will continue my story. So I hope you have a little bit more knowledge of the themes and what they represent. Leitmotifs, very Wagnerian work. Unfortunately, this piece doesn't only bring us back to the Romantic era, but it also brings us closer to Vladimir Putin, who is strongly, as you know, inspired by the Russian 19th century, when the Russian Empire grew explosively and the Russification policy was initiated. For what purpose was this composition by Borodin originally intended? Borodin wrote it for the occasion of the Silver Jubilee in 1880 of Tsar Alexander II, who we know as Alexander the Liberator because he abolished serfdom. But this Alexander was not a liberator for everyone. On the contrary, it was under this Tsar that the Russian Empire expanded in Central Asia and the Caucasus. This process was accompanied by a lot of violence, oppression, Russification, and purges. For example, there was in the 60s an ethnical cleansing of the Caucasus from Caucasian Circassians. These black pages are now almost forgotten. And we may ask, was Borodin aware of the dark side of Russian imperialism? We may assume that news reports also in his time were heavily glossed over. Fake news is timeless. With the steppes of Central Asia, Borodin put Russia on the map as a peace-loving superpower. This work denies the cruelties of the expansion, or to put it even more bluntly, it tells us a lie wrapped up in seductive and dreamy music, and thus it contributes to Russia's image as a protecting force that also on this very day legitimizes its war in Ukraine. A piece like this keeps the vicious circle of ignorance, denial, and violence intact. What to do? I think the Russians say, что делать? Should we cancel this piece from our concert stages? No, certainly not. But I do consider that it's crucial that we listen from now with background knowledge to a piece like this. Of course, it is a painful awakening, but it can trigger an awareness. Think of it as a form of collective therapy. I think that's exactly what we need, both Russians and we here in the West. We can only allow ourselves to perform and to listen to a piece like this if we are willing to open our ears to the historical facts. But how do Russians get to those facts? Now disinformation dictates Russian education and media. Here in the West, it is also difficult to embed a piece like this in a realistic historical context. As a teacher of international groups of students, I know how little basic historical knowledge there is in general. Their knowledge of the Russian past and culture is in general extremely poor. Many musicians just want to make beautiful music. They want to rock themselves to sleep with the idea that music always is above politics. This desire is very understandable. It's natural to look for places to shelter, and music can offer us such a place. However, it is up to me to educate my pupils about the inconvenient truth. I consider it about the inconvenient truth between and behind the notes of some compositions they love. I consider it my task to tell them about the black pages of world history and the debatable role that music sometimes plays in this context. To end my story, it's up to all of us to choose. Do we use this kind of seductive music to rock ourselves asleep in the vicious circle? Or do we choose to play and to listen consciously our way out of this circle? And last but not least, we've just been listening to two themes, a subject and an object. Which theme resonates in you and in me? The subject, the object, or maybe the two together? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Saskia. I'm sure some of these questions will also come up in the round table, but before we switch to that, we will now have a small, short video composition, and there will be several of them in the course of our round table. And this is the first one.
Я жил в доме. Вы пришли и перекрасили мой дом. Но я человек. Меня нельзя перекрасить. Поэтому вы держите меня в клетке.
Piece by director Yulia Ovchinko. Ladies and gentlemen, let me then now introduce you to the three guests for the round table. Lana Pylaeva is one of the organizers of Foundation FreeRussiaNL, who is also one of the organizers of this evening. Lana holds a PhD in physics and is a researcher at Utrecht University. Being of Komi background, and Komi is a region, a non-Russian region in the north of Russia, do I say that correctly? Yes. So being from a Komi background, Lana is interested in issues relating to the decolonization of post-war Russia and questions of identity and culture. Obviously, we also hope to hear from Lana in this roundtable about the activities of Free Russia now, which you can tell us more about. Pavel Kanygin is a Russian investigative journalist who started his career at the Moscow daily Moskovsky Komsomolets and later joined the famous Russian newspaper Novaya Gazeta. Pavel has reported on the Ukrainian crisis since its very beginning in 2014, and he served, amongst others, as the newspaper special envoy at the Kiev Maidan, in Crimea, in Odessa, and in the Donbass. Since the start of full-scale war in Ukraine a year ago, Pavel has been based in the Netherlands and has launched his own independent news project on YouTube, Продолжение следует. Nikolai Epple is an independent researcher working on international memory culture and in particular on the memory of Soviet state terror. He was an editorial writer at the daily paper Vedomosti and published extensively on memory issues in Russian and international media. In 2020 he published The Inconvenient Past, Неудобное прошлое, Memory of State Crimes in Russia and Other Countries, which gained wide readership in Russia and has become an important book after the start of the war. I will organize our discussion of the next 45 minutes into 3 blocks that addresses 3 related sets of questions, and between the blocks there will be video compositions. In the first block I will be raising the question of how did we end up here where we are, where we stand? Where did things go wrong in Russia? The second set of questions touches on issues of culture and identity. Who am I is the overarching question for today's event. For all 3 of you, as Russian citizens in exile opposed to the war, this is a question you've been confronting over the last year. The third and final block poses the question, where do we go from here? Or what can and should we do now and in the future? And I'll start with the first block. Now, how did we end up here? Well, for me, as a historian, this is a very natural thing to ask always. When did things go wrong? What was the turning point? When exactly did it happen? Was it, and there are several options here, was it 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed and Gorbachev's democratization of the perestroika period ended? Was the turning point 1993 when President Yeltsin, first president of the Russian Federation, decided his conflict with the parliament by sending tanks in and shelling the parliament? Was it 1999 when Putin came to power? Or was it 2011, 2012 when the mass demonstrations against Putin and his falsification of the election results failed, unfortunately, to achieve anything? Many options. There are probably also other historic turning points which you could identify. And the question which of them was the crucial turning point is a very valid question to ask, and a question which is often asked. It is also, though, a very large question to which it is very difficult to give a conclusive and one answer. And therefore, for this roundtable, I wanted to reforge them, these questions, into a more personal question, which I want to address to all 3 of you. And that's the following question. What was for you a personal turning point? When you realized things were going wrong, or when you realized that you, or decided for yourself that you wanted or needed to do something against it? Lana, may I ask that question to you first? Yes.
So I think it was, for me, 2011.
Speak a little bit up, I think.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it was 2011, then, when it was clear that the system is going somewhere else, and but like maybe because I'm younger, it still seemed to me that there is some hope. And I completely lost hope, even not in 2014, but after poisoning of Navalny. Because it was, for me at least, some sort of hope that, yes, the system can change in a non-violent way. But then when he was poisoned with a chemical weapon, it became clear that nothing can be changed, that this is the end, basically. From here, only terror will proceed. And
can you remind us, when was that? When was the poisoning? Was that 2019?
2020.
2020? Okay, yeah.
He was on a flight in Novosibirsk or Omsk, somewhere there, and then after this point, when they used chemical weapon against one of the prominent Russian opposition leaders, he was always off limits. This is what my feeling was, that he's off limits for the system, that the system is not ready to cross this boundary, not ready to show themselves like this to the world. There was, at least for me, it was like there is something holding it back. But using chemical weapon against Navalny, that was like, that's it. This is the end of the system. It's corrupt. It's just a black hole.
Were you still living in Russia at the time, or were you already in the Netherlands?
I was already in Germany.
Okay. And were you a supporter of Navalny, or was it more the fact that, well, he was being attacked in this way, which made you feel?
It was the fact that he was attacked in this way. I was always supporting his anti-corruption ideas and the way he was investigating this just astounding sums of values of corruption in Russia and throughout the system, from every tiny little person who had access, then they were stealing millions. But there was also a little bit controversial parts of Navalny when he was still attending Russian marches, and for me this was a no-go. But of course the idea of having opposition, having somebody who was so free to speak the truth, was all like it was appealing to me.
He was silenced. Yes, I see. And you said, well, you realized that things were not going in the wrong direction. Did that mean for you also a call for action? Did you say, well, I have to do something? And what did you decide that you could do or should do?
Actually, yes, we started to organize protests here in the Netherlands, organized FreeRussiaNL in January 2021, when Navalny returned to Russia and was immediately put to jail, already at the airport. And this, I think, was also for many people here in the Netherlands a point when all of a sudden we did not know each other. We just applied to host a meeting, a demonstration in Amsterdam and in The Hague. And thanks to the municipality, to the Gemeente, they connected all of us because they said they all applied for the same demonstration around the same topic. And yeah, but I think that at this point for me it was clear that Russia is beyond repair, so that we have to focus on building a community here in the Netherlands or abroad where we are. And from this community already speak up, support the community, and also maybe try to influence local politicians in European countries, because, yeah, as I said, Russia for me at this point was beyond repair. It was a terrorist regime. They were using chemical weapons against citizens, not only Russian citizens, but also citizens of Europe. And
so that also implies then that the things that you thought, well, what you set yourself the aim to do was to achieve something here in the Netherlands, rather than try and achieve something in Russia, or both.
Actually,
and Did you think, if I can, and did you think that by doing something here you might be able to change something in Russia?
Yes, definitely. We were thinking like this, but also I think we can learn a lot from Dutch people on the way you know what democracy is and how it works. And maybe you remember this MH17 and this Bonanza papers and all this story. And for me it was also heartbreaking to see how this criminal grain money flooded Europe, and they were supporting all these false narratives, fake news and propaganda. And I know that you Europeans are not so familiar with this, and I saw how many people fall for this, and how many politicians also were supporting these crazy ideas. Of course, money, like pockets stuffed with these dirty dollars, with blood and whatever. And it was okay. It was okay for almost everybody. And I felt like it cannot be. We were writing a petition to Dutch government saying, you have to do something, because it is also corrupting your system here. This money, this dirty money, millions, billions, you name them, some for a certain person they will pay. And this has to be stopped, because this was just too corrupt, and it can corrupt any system.
So in fact, what you wanted to do was to both influence, in fact, society here, and through that also to influence Russia.
Yeah. To influence Russia, because I don't have trust in Russian government and Russian authorities, so I thought the only way was to communicate with people, and also communicate with authorities here in Europe, so to put personalized sanctions against the Putin cronies, all supporters of war and regime, that they cannot use their assets, because of course they were getting a lot of money there from taxpayers' money, so Russian people money, and storing them here in a safe environment where they're well protected by working legislative system.
Ironically, of course, you succeed. Well, not you. Well, a lot of these things were in fact sanctioned, but only after the start of the war.
Unfortunately, not yet. But we were working on it.
Thank you, Pavel. What was your wake-up call, so to say? Do you have a specific moment in time when you, well, for yourself, you realized, well, this is not the country I want to live in, or this is going wrong, and what were these telltale signs? Could you say something about that?
Thank you for having me, first of all. It's my pleasure to be here. But to be honest, I'm still considering Russia to be my motherland. I still want to go back there. I still love this country, and I love people of this country. Of course, I hate the government, but let's guys divide the government and the people of this country. So it's two, how do you call it, Nadesa, two big differences. Sorry, I think it's not translated. It's like, it's beyond translation. Let me disagree with you, because I think Russia is not beyond repair. I think our country still, there is some future to see ahead when we talk about this country. I think the way Vladimir Putin exploited and still, so he has been exploiting the bad traits of Russian people, bad characters, like this vice of people's nature, not virtue but vice. It's not the problem of people that they, of course, the part, like people are to blame to some extent, but they have been deluded I mean, since the beginning of Putin era, like from 1999, when everything happened, when Boris Yeltsin handed power to this KGB officer. So it's not like a brainer that the KGB officer couldn't be the leader of the country that big. So I think that when everything happened, when everything just, when like a bad seed was planted in the
so essentially
in the ruling class.
Putin is the problem, essentially.
I think he's the.
That's when things went wrong.
I wouldn't say that he's the main problem, but he's the so he found a way to instill this hatred and anger amongst Russian people. And it happened in Chechnya, actually, in that Caucasus War, right? So when he literally used dirty tricks to make Russian people hate Chechens, to make Russian people hate like everyone who is not like them.
But where do the hatred and anger come from then? That Putin mobilizes or plays on or fortifies maybe even?
I think every human being has it. I mean, and it's a talent of I don't know, of a KGB operative, you know, to find the key, you know, to open up this kind of box with this wrath and anger and everything that is bad.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, you know. Every human being has like it's like you know, Chinese yin and yang, you know. Like we all have it.
Yeah. And when did you realize this? And what did you decide should be done then?
So, like,
was there a specific moment in time that you realized that things were not?
So everything became really, really obvious for me. Yeah, in 2011, when the power was passed on to Vladimir Putin back again.
Oh, when Medvedev and Putin changed points again.
Yeah, when this scheme happened, right? At that moment, and on, for me, for my family, for everyone at Novaya Gazeta, it was like crystal clear that. So Dmitry Muratov told that I just remember his phrase, like back in the day, that it's time to pack, you know, and not for us, but for good people of this country, it's time to pack and to sell real estate, cars, and get out of here, get the hell out of here.
But there still was hope as well. I mean, there were these mass demonstrations. It was Did you expect that this would achieve something? Did you have hopes for these demonstrations to change the nature of the regime, or to at least stop Putin in going further into an authoritarian direction?
I still get it. I still have this hope, because until there is one single person having this descent and who stayed in the country, there is hope. And back in the day, in 2011, in 2012, and even in 2017, and on, I had this hope. I was hoping that maybe it's just like a bad point on this long way of Russian modern history, and at some point we could make it right, but we couldn't. But the thing is that when we talked on the phone, I told you that there were so many moments in their modern Russian history that we could have made it worse, that we could have done worse. We could have made many bad turns, and still the prospect of a nuclear how do I say it, war, accident, I don't know, is still at hand. It's still there. So,
thank you. Nikolai, what was your wake-up call, or your moment of truth, so to say, or of vision, and what did you decide that could be done or should be done?
For me, I'm sorry for my voice problem with throat. I'm trying to be audible. For me, the beginning of New Russia coincided with my the moment I begin to feel myself as a full conscious person. I was 14 in 1991 when it was coup d'etat, putsch, and on the third day I was locked by my parents at home, and the third day I fled my flat to the square where it was resistance, and it's a music event here, and on this square I met Mstislav Rostropovich on the tank. It was the only time I met Mstislav Rostropovich. So for me, it always was a lot of hope, and I, in a way, identify myself with new Russia, with waking up of Russian society and so on. And I remember very good the exact point when I understood, I felt that something is seriously wrong. It was December 2010. It was the second Yukos trial. I was listening radio broadcast translation of the Khodorkovsky second sentence, and I remember it was December. It was icy rain, not snow, not rain, but icy rain, and the sentence was 10 years. He was allegedly stole all the oil that Yukos extracted. I understood very well that the leader of my country is a resentful, aggrieved person for whom the law is just an instrument of pursuing his personal aims, instrument of dealing with his personal opponents, and he's in fact a very aggrieved person, and those experts of Russia are very correct to say that grievance is the main motive of Putin and the Russian authorities. And it was December 2010, and later when I began to work in the newspaper, I had the opportunity to see, to feel how Russian society, how Russian state works, because we could speak, take comments with everyone, with politics, with experts, with activists, and I understood that the way how it works, the models of decision making, of the models how authorities behave and so on, all these models are Soviet legacy, Soviet models. And it meant that it was not a problem when something went wrong. The problem is that the Soviet dragon was not dead, and the old Soviet Stalinist models are still alive. And the problem is that when Soviet Union collapsed, there was no trial. This dragon was not defeated, and Soviet Stalin's crimes were not legally condemned. So the problem is that the Soviet dragon was and is still alive. And what I understood, that it is important to describe the ways of dealing with state crimes in other countries. That's why I wrote this book, because the main problem of Russia is to find a way to deal with its own criminal past. And it is the necessary option to, without this, there's no future. We're condemned to iterate this again and again. And this war with Ukraine, I see it's very, very clear. It's the way to conserve this zombie USSR construction.
Well, so the way you, if I summarize it, the way you see it, in fact, is the basic problem is that the past was never confronted, Soviet structures were not eradicated, and you realized, so the problem was older, in fact, but you realized that that was the problem in 2010, or well, maybe earlier, but that was for you, it was a turning point.
I began to realize
to your work at the newspaper, and I wondered, for you, did you think that through your work at the newspaper that you could do anything against this? Or in another way, what did you feel powerless to do anything against it, or did you feel that something was within your reach, or the reach of you and your colleagues or friends to do about this?
When you communicate with experts and activists and those who do something, you cannot be pessimist because you see that how much actors there are. In fact, yes, there is great problems. It's great passivity in Russian society, and in fact, I agree with Pavel. Russian society is occupied by state, and in a way, Russian people are under occupation. But there are such things as tyrannies.
Sorry,
there are such things as tyranny, as dictatorships.
Yeah.
In all dictatorships, civil society have not many option to resist. But all dictatorships finally they have their end. So working in newspaper, I witnessed that in fact Russian society is alive, and now when there are so many activists and journalists and so on was forced to leave Russia, we see how many medias, projects and so on are launched all over the world. It is an evidence that there are actors who are ready to do something. So it's not a dead silence.
Something can be done. I think we have to end the first block here. We'll have a short video composition now, and then we'll go to the second block of questions. Thank you. Who am I is the resounding question that is the title of this event, and it's a question I would directly want to pass on to my three panelists. And it's a question, of course, of identity and of self-identification. How do you see yourself? And I tried to think of some possibilities, because when I was asked to moderate this roundtable, it was described in the mail I got. It said the organizers are the Russian-speaking community in the Netherlands who are opposed to the war. Well, that's a quite neatly described category, but yeah, is that an identity? But other identities can also, of course, be imagined. Are we Russians? Is it Russian citizens? Is it Russian speakers? Is it Russian exiles? Russian speakers opposed to the war, which is also a different category. Russian oppositionists. How do you see yourselves? And I want to attach a second question immediately to it. Did the war of the last year change something in the way you see yourself or identify yourself, or the group that you feel you belong to? And I would like to start with Nikolai. No, he's just been speaking. Let him rest his voice a little bit. We'll start with Lana.
Yes, when in Russian history there are a lot of episodes of waves of immigrations, and we know very good that when you're in the situation of immigration, when you're out of your country, it's always rising, the situation, always rising questions about identity.
And how do you see yourself? If you would be pressed to identify yourself?
It's still difficult for me to call myself emigre. I feel myself a Russian living in Netherlands, and that's all. For me, it is a very interesting question of identification, because one of the very important questions is the question about responsibility. It's one of the
exactly, because that's of course the next question would indeed be. You've written a lot about that there is, if not collective guilt, there is collective responsibility. But then the question is, what's the collective that is responsible?
Yeah. So it's this discussion in Russia and in Russians abroad are very important, and as my book describes this discussion, the same discussion in Germany, and this very important book of Karl Jaspers about the Schuldfrage, about this difference between guilt and responsibility, and it raises the question about identification. So when we are speaking about responsibility, who I represent when I'm saying about responsibility, when I'm asking myself this question.
Is it a Russian citizen, or is it a Russian speaker that makes you responsible? What's
I think that if, for me, this conversation could be interesting, just if I can say not just for myself.
No?
Because, okay, I'm not a bad guy. I feel myself guilty, not guilty, but responsible. I was always opposed to Putin. Don't blame me, and so on. So it's my personal story. It's not so interesting to anybody.
No, but if you do say that there is responsibility, then that responsibility belongs to a certain group. And what is that group? Is that the people living in Russia? Is it Russian citizens? Is it only Russian speakers? That's the question I'm interested in.
Yes, and it's a really interesting question. And for me, I understand that for me it is important to identify myself with Russians, and not to separate. When I was writing my book, I was trying to explain for myself what is responsibility, because it's a great philosophical question. So, and the easy answer for me, there is a story of a girl. She's when she was 30, she just knew that her grandfather was a commandant of Plaszow Nazi concentration camp. She never knew this before, and it was a question for her: what does it mean for her to be responsible for the crimes of her grandfather? And her answer is not to separate yourself from this legacy, from Germans, her answer is not to shut up. And she wrote a book, and now she is a guide who makes excursions for children in this concentration camp.
So she took her responsibility, that's in the end. Yeah.
So this important thing is not to separate from the difficult episodes of your nation, not to separate yourself from those terrible things which are happening.
Yes.
Because I think that the very important role of intellectuals, so people of culture, those who want to speak, take part in this conversation about this war, and maybe future conversation with Ukrainian society. It is to be ready to apologize. In political practice, the first step of every reconciliation is apologies.
Pavel, I see you nodding vehemently. Is that something you agree with? Is apologizing, is that...
Yes, of course. It really resonates with,
I'll just finish this.
Yes, sure.
And if I represent just myself, it's not so interesting. I'm not so much to apologize for. And if I separate myself from, for example, these mobilized persons, or from Russian soldiers, they are criminals. I have nothing common with them. So I cannot speak about apologies, because the tragedy of this war is a result of a lot of tragedies which happen in Russia. It's inequality, poverty, passiveness, and so on. And it's difficult to speak about this now when we're speaking with Ukrainians and so on, but for me it is important to identify myself with Russians and even with those who making crimes, because only then I have a right to take part in discussion about apologies.
Yes, Russians. I guess Lana has something to say about that. Well, because it's very interesting. I mean, I assume you don't identify or self-identify as Russian, but you might feel responsibility or not. How do you look on these issues?
Of course, I was born in Soviet Union and I grew up on the territory of Russian Federation. I never identified myself as a Russian. At home we don't even speak Russian.
No.
So, for me, yeah, I think the more correct term, which is now appearing, for example, in German, is Rusländisch. That we are Rusländisch. We are not Russian, nicht Russisch, sondern Rusländisch. We come from this area. And
from the Russian state,
from the Russian state, from the Russian Federation, which is a fake federation on the paper. And of course, with the beginning of the war, and also looking on at the ideas of the war that Putin was first stating, that Ukrainian nation, Ukrainian people shall not exist, that they all must be Russified. This resonates in me very strongly. So this is what's happening in our region. We are...
It's something you recognize.
Exactly. Yeah. We are Komi, but we have 0 schools that actually teach in Komi. I studied in a school and I never ever had Komi. I cannot read in Komi, I cannot write, because I never studied it. I can only talk. And how can it be? Can you imagine being in the Netherlands and speaking, I don't know, English? And all the schooling is in English. Can you come to Switzerland and say, what, Italian? No, you are German. And like the least that we will get will be like this. That's why, of course, this war now, it's a colonial war. It's an imperial war. It's a war of the state of Russia against its colony, because they want the colony back. They want the colony to subside.
Well, I want to take you back to the issue of identity and the who am I question, because you say, well, I don't identify as Russian, but I feel very strongly from the fact that you have founded FreeRussiaNL that you do feel a certain sense of that responsibility but for the responsibility for whom? Is it for Russian speakers? Is it for the Rusländisch people, the people who are citizens then in the end of the Russian state? Is that what the entity that the responsibility lies on or comes from?
I think it's, people that have a connection to Russia. And of course I fully agree that it was a valid correction, that what I wanted to say in the beginning, that to me the Russian system was corrupt and beyond repair. But of course I'm a sane person. I understand that 140 million people will not disappear in flesh, and we will have to communicate with them. We have to reintegrate them. They will have to digest this inconvenient past. And of course, this is the people I identify with.
Yeah.
I strongly feel for my region, for Komi, and I really hope that before I'm dead, I can go back there, go to Parma, walk, collect mushrooms, visit some nice, beautiful places that we have. So I'm Komi, and now I live in Germany, so I have German citizenship, but I am still Komi. And after the war, after this full-scale war, I realized that, at least with my family, I don't want to speak Russian anymore.
No.
So now we're collectively learning how to write in Komi.
Correct.
And all our conversations are exclusively in Komi.
Thank you. Pavel, responsibility. You obviously feel a lot of responsibility. You can see, you can tell it from your projects, for the way, from what you're writing. But for what? How do you identify? For what group do you feel responsible?
Thank you for this question. I think it's very, very important to elaborate a little bit on that. I think that responsibility is not about taking someone's guilt. It's about moral authority that you can take on. And I remember 2014 when the MH17 was shut down over Donbass, and Novaya Gazeta and me, so we just gathered up in our playing room and we decided that the next day, tomorrow, we're gonna make a cover page, like the front page with this, with the MH17 and with two words in Dutch. Forgive us, Holland, Прости, Голландия. And the very next day after we printed this page, we started receiving like lots of letters with like a pure intimidation. What are you asking forgiveness for? Like, we are not to blame, we didn't do that. Hey guys, we're gonna like set your office on fire because hey, you can't do that. So I'm just omitting the crossed words, you know, Russian crossed words. It was very serious for us. It was an act of taking this responsibility for people who did not understand what they were responsible. That they were responsible for shooting it down. Even if they didn't press this button, even if they didn't send the troops to Ukraine, but still, as Russian people, as people who, you know, have this passport, so it's up to them.
That's a heavy responsibility to take on yourself.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
We didn't accept this, you know, guilt, because, but we did
responsibility,
something.
not guilt, but responsibility.
Yes,
That's a
but
good distinction.
it's a moral authority that we had at that moment, and we spent it like this very quickly, and we didn't and still do not regret about it. But the thing is that we did at that moment we did something that our state, the government, the authority, Vladimir Putin whatsoever, did not have guts, you know, for.
And still does not.
And the society, and society did not have it either.
Yeah.
So that's what I think, what I consider to be responsibility. Like something that other people do not understand why they have to do, you know, something or like behave like in a certain way or like, you see what I mean? Yeah. So
yes, thank you. A video composition, the next one. Thank you. The third and concluding part of our round table, and we will keep it brief to give people in the audience also the chance to give, to ask questions or to make comments, participate in the discussion. And I will, making it brief means I will immediately put the difficult question, or how do you say that, the $100 question to all three of you. What do we do now? What can we do? And what should we do? And what do you what do you want to do personally? Anna, can I ask you to start?
First of all, I will continue to support Ukrainians and Ukrainian people and Ukraine in this war against the terroristic Putin regime. And I will, of course, support Russian civil society, Russian-speaking civil society.
In Russia?
In Russia and abroad.
Yeah.
And, of course, also my third goal is to develop Komi activism. We now have projects in Komi language, Komi culture, and many people, I see also this in our social networks and everywhere, that many people now get more involved and get interested in the Komi language and Komi culture.
How many Komi speakers are there in the world?
100,000.
100,000?
Yeah,
Okay.
100,000, yes. And yeah, that's it actually. So I think...
And with FreeRussiaNL, what are the plans?
With the FreeRussiaNL, we are planning some activities, and among the first top of the list is, of course, a lecture together with Nikolai Epple in Russian language about the Stalin time and how this changed the Soviet Union, and when again the state was put above people. We have some activists from Kalmykia. Kalmyk people, they were sent to Siberia. They were treated very badly, and many died.
It's a Buddhist nation on the south of Volga, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And only later on they were allowed to return to their native steppe region.
And that will also be part of this lecture?
Yes, that will be also like a round table discussion.
And when will this be? Is this known already? Just to make some publicity for it straight away?
Yeah, we will post it online, yes. It's already long overdue, right? I think somewhere maybe.
Keep an eye on this.
And we will continue this type of lectures because we also, this year was a very hard year, but I also got to meet many activists of native republics like Free Buryatia Foundation, Free Sakha Foundation, Tiva, Kalmykia, and we are planning a set of lectures where we'll be discussing, also covering these topics from these parts of Russia, their struggles together with the scientists.
And that's something of a network emerging of a Free Buryatia, and that's all outside. These are exile
yes,
groups, a sort of network of exile non-Russian nations. And is that in the Netherlands all, or is it
no, it's
Europe-wide?
It's more or less scattered throughout the world.
Yeah.
So the leader from Free Sakha, she's actually in Australia. And some people, like Free Buryatia, many people are in the States.
Yeah.
So it's all over the world, but I think it's very important, and now...
Buryatia is the nation where a lot of soldiers were from as well,
yes.
isn't it?
It's one of the poorest, like, if you look on the map of Russia and check our income, unfortunately the national republics are one among the poorest. And it's also a surprising coincidence because they are often the richest in the natural resources, but the taxation and all the system, super centralized system in Russia is made in such a way to benefit Moscow. And I think it's now important to turn a little bit the attention from Russia, represented by the blonde woman in the red sarafan, and all this baranki stuff. Matryoshki, exactly, to a broad variety of nations existing in Russian.
Yes.
Even when I came to St. Petersburg, I spoke Russian with an accent, and it was very badly received. And it's a norm, right? Because I have my own language, and that's why I have an accent in Russian. I also have an accent in English, and nobody's surprised. So I think it's now a time to perceive Russia as an empire with conquered many different ethnicities.
So in that sense, maybe the war also provoked something which accelerated or catalyzed something which was there already probably, but...
Yes, it was already there, and now I think it's time for us to become subject, like active participant in the history of Russia, and not being dragged by Moscow somewhere.
Thank you. Yes. Pavel, what can we do, what should we do, what do you want to do, what are your plans? Also, and maybe to ask, connect something to it, and that's something I want to ask. I've seen sort of over the last year, Amsterdam or the Netherlands seems to be becoming sort of a hub for exile investigative Russian journalists, oppositional journalists, and that's very interesting. You have a critical mass of people here. Can you say something about that as well?
Yeah, a little hub, not as big as in Riga or even in Berlin or Tbilisi. So, but it's gaining momentum. So we are gaining this momentum. So for me personally, I think that my main goal and my major avenue is to facilitate change in my country. Since Novaya Gazeta is not existent anymore, so it stopped running. But there are some leftovers of this greater Novaya Gazeta, and I represent one of these leftover, one of this piece. We started this project 1 year ago. It's called "Продолжение следует", to be continued, if translated in Russian, English, and we try to connect to people who are still in doubt, who are still deciding what is vice and what is virtue in regard to Russian modern reality. If you see what I mean.
People in Russia.
Yes. Yeah. So we are targeting people in Russia. We're targeting like young audience in the 20 and 30. So these middle-aged people who, I suppose, in 10, 20 years will be new leaders of this territory. It doesn't matter what it's going to be, how it's going to be look like. I don't know. But still, we would like to talk to them. We would like to connect to them, and we like there are so many topics that these people were resistant to.
And do you feel you reach young people?
Yes. Surprisingly, we are doing pretty fine. So around 50% of our audience is exactly those people. Okay. Yeah, and I'm really glad. So along with other YouTube guys and YouTubers, creators, we are connecting to them, like Maxim Katz, for example, Alexei Pivovarov, I don't know, Yuri Duch, Katya Gordeeva, Ekaterina Gordeeva, myself, some other projects. So for us it is really important because YouTube is still available in the country. So you can run whatever paper you want, but it's not going to be able to reach those people because those people do not read. So they watch TV. So TV, like this black magic screen, is like one of the family member. You know, like as I was explaining to you back then. So and we in order to sneak into their brain, we have to learn how to talk to them. Using these images, graphics, and, but of course, it's not about propaganda and even contra-propaganda. It's about talking to people and explaining what is really happening and enlightening them on those topics that they were resistant to understand, to talk about. Like, I don't know, like post-colonialism, imperialism, inequality, sex, gender, LGBTQ, like economic crisis, Chechen war, the war in Ukraine. So all these topics, and like slowly but surely, we are able to connect to those people, and I see like through this feedback, feed that like they're like, I'm not joking, like there are hundreds of comments that we receive from people saying that, like I sent this piece to my babushka, at first she was very, she just, she freaked out at me, but then she told me that, maybe that bold guy is right, Or for example, I just sent to my boyfriend, and we got a very lengthy discussion at night. But next morning he asked to send me more videos like this with Maxim Katz and Ekaterina Gordeeva, etc. So, and that's how we started this conversation. So I'm really glad that YouTube is helping people like start this conversation.
So paradoxically, maybe, if I hear you now, but correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe before the war, before you shifted to YouTube, you might have not been reaching this audience, because a printed newspaper is not what young people read.
Exactly, yeah.
So in that sense, you are able to reach these people better now than before.
Yeah, as long as the platform is there.
That's true.
But even if it's blocked, so like there is such an advanced culture of using VPN in the country that I believe that they couldn't just erase YouTube from everyone's home. So people are really attached to that. Yeah, and I don't regret that I had wasted all these years.
No, I wouldn't. That was not what I was suggesting.
But finally we reached the point when like if you want to change, you need to connect to the people. Yeah.
Thank you. Nikolai, what do you think? What can and should be done, and what do you think
should be done? On the first day of the war, I wrote a letter to my friend. He's a German Catholic priest in Auschwitz. He's the second generation, so it was his way of dealing with German guilt. He went to work as a priest and as a guide in Polish town Auschwitz, into Oswiecim, and to Auschwitz Museum. So he's for 30 years there, and I asked him what should we do. He said, with his clear German mind, he said, first try to stop the war. If you cannot stop the war, help the victims. So, but should be done. But as for me, I'm not an activist. I'm not a journalist. As a researcher, I'm trying to taking part in discussions about dealing with Soviet legacy, because I think it is still very important and core question, and I see that there is an interest to these questions, interest to my book, and it's very important for Russian audience to understand how it works. What should you do if you understand that your country, your state is criminal? How this problem with guilt and responsibility works, and for example, in Russia was republished the translation of this Karl Jasper's book, and it sells very good now in Russia. And I wrote forward for this book. And now, as a researcher, I'm trying to continue my work. I'm trying to research how the process of reconciliation was constructed in countries which were in war and in societies which were divided. So I think in the future it will be very important questions.
Yes. Would you agree? Because it is my impression that, well, so considering the reaction to your book in Russia, that the war actually, sort of sparked more interest in the Soviet legacy and the fact that Russia never came to terms with that, because that has for a long time been a topic which, well, it was a niche topic which interested a small sort of section of intellectuals, whereas I now hear people among my friends recommend me your book, and I'm sure that 10 or so, 3 years ago they would not have been particularly interested in the issue. So it seems that it makes people more aware that the fact that happens now, that this is a fact, that is a thing that maybe should have taken place in Russia more openly.
Yes, people feel connection of what's going on now with this Soviet Gulag legacy, and just one fact: that last year the number of visitors in Moscow State Gulag History Museum was twice more than normally. So people feel this connection, and it's really surge of interest to Soviet state terror history.
Yes. Thank you. We have a video composition and then we have some time for questions.
устойчивому мнению о том, что же действительно нужно и целесообразно. Многие не раз отмечали ваше прекрасное чувство юмора.
Ну не верю я Путину. Морда у него хитрая и самодовольная. Самое главное, на злодея-то он вообще не похож, так, мелкотня. Знаешь, как эта мелкотня может жизнь людям испортить? Вот этот вот украинец, как там его, не знаю, голодает который. Он же вообще за себя ничего не просит. Он же хочет, чтобы невинных из тюрьмы выпустили. Ну, так я, знаешь, я просто решила почитать, кого он хочет, чтобы выпустили. Там одному 12 лет строгача впаяли. Знаешь, за что? Он фотографировал аэродром. У него такая интересная фамилия. Шур. Да. Виктор, кажется. Да, Виктор Шур. Так вот, по мере этого вот дела, оно выяснилось, что это аэропорт вообще не фурычит уже лет 100. А 12 лет строгача нате, пожалуйста. То есть у нас нельзя фотографировать засранный, поросший бурьяном аэропорт, потому что это, блядь, государственная измена. Вот они меня за кого держат, а? Вот они меня, блядь, за кого держат? За быдло под валерьянкой. Мне зла не хватает. Я бы им прямо вот эти вот рожи вот так вот утубала. И вот так вот. Я вообще терпеть ненавижу, когда из меня идиотку делают. Знаешь, я тут на днях слушала разговор одних умников. Они там по поводу какого-то художника, ну, типа он гений. Так вот этот гений, он сказал, что сочетание желтого и синего нравится может только мудакам. А чё? Ну, значит, я мудак. Потому что мне нравится, понимаешь? Вот нравится мне. Ну а чё? Смотри. Желтый песок, синее море. Синее небо, желтое солнце. Чё, некрасиво, что ли? Да это вообще природное сочетание. И чё? То есть природа мудак, да? А я считаю, что природа не может быть мудаком. Вот так вот. А вот не надо народ злить.
We have some time for questions from the audience, not as much time as I had hoped. Please raise your hand. I will come to you with the microphone. I will hold the microphone. And please formulate your question so that it ends in question mark.
My name is Sergey. Sorry for my English. I would like to ask you, in internet started some conversation about reparation that real Russians opposition politicians shouldn't ask about reparation. They should ask for new Marshall Plan for Russia, that it can help fighting with Putin inside of Russia. What do you think about new Marshall Plan? Can it help fighting with Putin? And, yeah, that's all.
Can it help with against Putin?
Yeah, fighting against Putin inside.
A Marshall Plan for Ukraine or what?
For Russia.
A Marshall Plan for Russia. Can it help the fight against Putin? Who wants to take up this question? Pavel, I think you have interesting thoughts about this.
I'm not an expert at that, so I have no idea how it might be done. So I think first of all, we have to stop the war, and Ukraine should fight until they reach the borders established in 1991. I think that's the reason why everything is happening, and then I think it's up to international community to come up with some solution how we should rebuild Ukraine first, and then we'll see what happens. What will be happening to Russia, because I don't know, the situation is still underway. It's ongoing situation, and
so first the Marshall Plan for Ukraine, and then maybe for Russia, but that will
it's
probably
fair,
require Putin not being there.
It wouldn't be fair to even to start this conversation. Let's give us money because we are the suffering part, like a party which is not. Which is partly true, but not, because Ukraine is the victim of this war.
Yeah, no money yet. Is there somebody else who wants to ask a question? Yes.
Hello, I've got a very short question. What do you think when we will be able to come back to free Russia? It's a very personal question for me too. I live here, but I've got 2 kids, and I've got a hope. I want to bring them to free Russia, to show them the best of the country. When I will be able to do that? Can you tell me? Thank you.
A very concrete question. Dares to take it up? Well, we can. Lana, you want to say something, I think. I don't know.
I was a bit pessimistic about this, but I really hope that it will happen before I turn 60. And now, yeah. So at least... I'm 36, but yeah. I'm very pessimistic about this because for me it seems like the system is about to conserve itself and go for a long war. And now the whole world needs to reconsider and maybe take a little bit more, being a little bit more brave in supporting Ukraine, just to stop murders of hundreds, thousands of civilians there.
Pavel, Nikolai, I don't expect you to say answer soon, but do you think, because that might be paraphrasing the question a little bit, is it the very, very, very long term that there will be a free Russia, or could this also be achieved on a middle term? I mean, how pessimistic are you? Because I assume all three of you to be pessimistic, so that's what we start from, but then there can be gradations in that.
I'm not. I think 2 to 5, from 2 to 5 years, approximately, like something around that, and we'll see how far it'll go further. Probably it'll go really far, like a new Soviet era, like 70 years more. But I do doubt that. I think it's not what's going to happen. And actually, in this scenario, if Russia will be drained by this criminal war, I'm connecting to your question. I think it's really fair to come up with some plan how we should help this country not become like a Weimar, like a neo-Nazi Germany again, you know, because if the country is drained to the extent that people are humiliated and they are suffering, like they will be suffering probably. I don't know. It's the ground, like the basement for something bad to see ahead, right? Even worse. But of course, like first like a restoration of Ukraine, but at the same time, not to bail on Russia, especially like given that people were and still are manipulated by the regime. We should drain the pockets of oligarchs and all those people who were enabling and still enabling Putin and the government. That's who's going to pay for that. And as long as I know, the assets have been arrested all across the world. I think that's the budget that we should spend on restoration of Ukraine. That's fair.
Nikolai, how pessimistic are you?
I think I have just no instrument to assess this time, and I don't. Let's want to speculate.
I've got time for one more question, I think, and I see someone there in the audience.
Good evening. I have a question to Lana because I personally relate a lot with many things that you said because I'm also coming from Tatarstan. And I have a question. Did you ever feel Russian culture, language as a part of you as a person? And if you did so, do you want to disengage now from it completely?
Actually, it was always a little bit foreign for me, because when I was asked, like, what is typical, let's make a typical Russian dish, like, can you make something? And at home, because my grandma, we lived in a village, and we ate a lot of like fish, mushrooms, and cooking this commy food. So when I came to Germany, they were asking me, for example, let's make something Russian. I was like, let me Google it for you, because I don't know. And I'm not used to these things. Many Russian dishes, they are foreign for me. I don't know all this like baked stuff and everything. I know komi, I can do this. And also, I'd never felt that it's like my something mine. Maybe my connection with Komi is a little bit, was always there, because we speak Komi, we eat Komi food, and it was always for me there. I remember, for example, I also told Gijs about this, this very famous Pushkin poem about a Russian spirit and the oak tree. We had to learn it by heart. And then we had a discussion in our classroom that, by the way, has anyone seen oak?
Because Komi is too northern for oaks to grow.
Yes, and then we were like, it looks like this on the picture and has these leaves, And one of us, yes, I visited my grandma and she lives somewhere in the south and I saw an oak. Next time I can bring you some leaves. And this is like, Russian spirit, it smells like Russia. We don't have oaks.
Thank you very much. I'm sure during the buffet, I don't know if there's any Komi food in the buffet, but unfortunately not. But I'm sure you will have the opportunities to ask any pressing questions that you still might have to our three guests. But I want to ask you now to give a warm applause to Before we can go to the buffet, we have a very important video presentation because it explains where the money from this charity event will in the end go to. So, please.
Коливання температури. Отже, дивимось на синоптичну мапу. Потужний атмосферний фронт із північного заходу завтра пройде через всю територію України, принесе опади переважно у вигляді дощу, подекуди з мокрим снігом у більшості областей. В середу вони ще залишаться у західних.
Знову світло вимкнулося.
I guess there is something waiting for us there in that corner, as far as I can see. Will it show itself how to?
I want to say something. First of all, thank you guys for this coaching. And the donuts that you can buy for donation were actually made by a Ukrainian refugee that fled here to the Netherlands, and she's now currently in Stichting, and she used to have her own bakery in the center of Kiev. So I agreed with her that all the proceedings will go for Warm for Ukraine Fund to buy generators for Ukraine. Thank you.